Starting off with a Chinese dissident who it seems has become a bit of an issue in the US presidential election.
Well, at least Mitt Romney is trying to make him an issue. Of course, Chen Guangcheng has made international headlines after escaping from house arrest in China on Saturday and is now, we think, under the protection of the US Embassy in Beijing, although that's not been confirmed by either country. Now, Mitt Romney tried to make this a presidential issue yesterday, as The Guardian reports, by saying any serious US policy must confront China's human rights failings and calling on Barack Obama to protect him. Now, of course, if he tries to make this an election issue, it makes an already very tricky situation even more complicated for Barack Obama. Of course, this is a difficult time for this to happen, both for the US and Chinese authorities. As The Independent explains, in the middle of an election campaign, the US wants to make it clear that they're going to protect Chinese dissidents. They'll want to be shown to offer him asylum and so on. But at the same time, they don't want to upset the Chinese authorities because, as we heard in that report, Hillary Clinton is set to visit later this week. Her Undersecretary for State is visiting today, has arrived today. And so they've got these difficult trade talks going on. They don't really need the issue of this dissident coming in the middle to throw a stone into all of that. Now, the New York Times is looking at what this issue might mean over the longer term for politics in China. Remember, we've heard a lot recently about how the downfall of Bo Xilai might have given a boost to the more pro-reform elements of the Chinese administration. Those who are perhaps more in favour of civil liberties might have got the upper hand with his downfall there. Now, the New York Times says that this Chen Guangcheng incident might in fact have the opposite effect, because those hardliners in the administration could now say that this is all part of a conspiracy backed by the US to make China look embarrassed abroad. And China now is much more nationalistic than it was 20 years ago, when the last time this happened, when a Chinese dissident last took refuge in the US Embassy in 1989. That's at least according to the New York Times. So they say they might have more popular support in China for indeed saying that this is a kind of US conspiracy and taking a very hard line.
Now, the papers are also marking an anniversary. It's a year since the death of Osama bin Laden.
Yes, now remember at the time a lot was said about how Osama bin Laden's death might not be that relevant in terms of what was happening with al-Qaeda on the ground, because it was said that he'd become detached from the al-Qaeda leadership, that he wasn't really taking any key decisions anyway. Well, The Guardian has published a series of files today that make it look like perhaps that wasn't so true. They seem to show that he was in close correspondence with the Taliban leader Mullah Omar until very up close to the end of his life. And that, of course, would have major consequences for the peace process in Afghanistan, where the US and other Western actors are increasingly accepting that they need to strike some kind of deal with the Taliban. But of course, if they might then provide a haven for al-Qaeda-backed militants who could then plot terrorist attacks against the West, that makes that much more difficult.
And what about the relevance of al-Qaeda? Did his death make it less relevant internationally?
Well, as I said, that's something a lot of people said at the time, that the organisation had split into different branches around the Middle East that weren't really connected with one another, that his deputy Ayman al-Zawahiri wouldn't have the same charisma and the same kind of mobilising power that Bin Laden had. But two articles today question that. There's one in the Daily Beast looking at the US's hunt for Zawahiri, who is expected to still be somewhere in the Afghanistan-Pakistan tribal areas. But they say that now that the US has been forced to halt drone strikes in that area to try and calm down Pakistani anger, it seems even less likely that they'll be able to get to him anytime soon. Well, there's another article in Foreign Policy which looks at 10 key myths that have been widely disseminated about al-Qaeda since bin Laden's death, they say, including that the Arab Spring has put them on the back foot. The Foreign Policy article says, well, no, not necessarily. It's created a chaos in a lot of the Arab world that they could still manage to exploit. It's also been widely said that they're on the decline, whereas actually they say they've created quite a successful franchise model where groups like Al-Shabaab in Somalia, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, who are in Yemen, of course, and less closely affiliated groups like Boko Haram in Nigeria have all copied what the Foreign Policy calls the Al-Qaeda business model. So even if the central leadership in Afghanistan isn't as powerful as once it was, that doesn't mean we can ignore the Al-Qaeda threat.
And briefly, in London, officials have been accused of going a little bit too far when it comes to the protection of the Olympic Games.
Yes, how would you like it if you found that there were rockets being installed on your roof, Claire?
I don't think I'd be a fan.
No, it's not gone down very well with the residents of a private block in Bow, East London. Now, this is a Ministry of Defence attempt to try and secure the area ahead of the Olympic Games, but local residents do say it seems a bit surreal that they're going to have these missiles that can take aircraft down on their roofs. They're not particularly keen on the idea at all.
I can imagine. All right, thank you very much for that look at the international press, Elena. Now, still to come here on Live from Paris.